Welcome back. Yes, we've got those two gentlemen joining us this morning to talk us through the elections that just happened in Edo State. Jake Epelle is the founder, TAF Africa. He joins us from Benin. We also do have Dr. Chima Amadi, Chairman, Center for Transparency Advocacy, also joining us virtually. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on the program today. Well,
good morning, Chamberlain. Thank you for having us.
Yes. Let me start with you, Mr. Epelle. You're still in Benin, and there are lots of reactions coming through from Benin about this just concluded elections. From what you have seen, I mean, you, from the get-go, preparations, close proximity with the participants, the organizers, the umpire. What's your impression about how all of this turned out?
I think, Chamberlain, I'll look at it from three perspectives. Number one is the process. Was the process followed? Was the process activated? Number two is provision of the electoral resources expected from INEC. And the third will be the performance of INEC and all the election stakeholders. I think by way of making an opening statement, I will say that this election have seen the highest rigor and the highest bidder coming out. And that to say that everyone, especially the two leading political actors, the APC and the PDP, were all involved. And it's unfortunate that things is playing out the way it's playing out, especially for the electoral process. And so whether was the process effectively activated and followed through? Not in all cases. I would say about 40%, 45% of the process could be something that anyone will be glad to see. In terms of provision, we had issues with early show up by INEC at the various polling units, and I don't know why we keep having this logistical problem. We have, over the years, proposed that INEC should look the other way, especially when it comes to the Road Transport Union. They have been seen and known to be ineffective and not showing up when they should show up, even when the money has been given to them.
We'll still come to that in terms of how all of that step by step. But let me also get Dr. Amadi's initial thoughts on this same matter. You were also in Benin for this election before you, left the place after the elections were over and done with. But going there, you had some expectations. How did it turn out for you?
Yeah. Good morning, Chamberlain. From the deployments of the Center for Transparency Advocacy, and the various reports that our observers have sent in, plus eyewitness accounts from our boots on the ground, I can substantially agree with what Mr. Epelle, his own assessment, which is not too far off from our predictions of how the elections might be. It was an election that's, was an anticlimax, if you ask me. Anticlimax in terms of the security concerns, the build-up to the elections. Many observers have felt that it was going to be, or there was going to be a breakdown in security leading to, violence. But even though there were pockets of violence here and there, it turned out as we expected or predicted that it was going to be a bazaar of sorts.
Could you just tell us, what were those indications?
Both selling and buying.
Pardon me, what did you see that made you predict that it was going to turn out the way it did?
First, you have to look at antecedents. In 2016, there was a build-up of this nature. But then, surprisingly, and I was on ground then, turns out that there was a kind of, well, I say, agreement between the various actors to just go for the highest bidder. So the set-up camps were openly where votes were being traded, and then the security just looked on by. And 4 years later, in fact, in those states, the menace of vote buying came to the fore. And 4 years later, it was repeated. So we saw the build up to these elections and how the canvassers were, putting a price tag on votes. And some of us had predicted that it could go as high as 15 to 20,000. Our fears were basically affirmed because that was what happened during the day. It was just about who was the highest bidder, and that was what you saw in many places. So that could explain why the candidate of the Labour Party was not there to be found, because it was more or less bought out of the market. And again, if you also saw how some of the canvassers were going about, the mobilization, even buying up people's voters cards, the biometric cards, you just realize that it was going to be that way. So these were the indicators we had to show that the elections was going to be, as usual, a buyers and sellers market affair. Again, with regards to security, I would say that the security more or less were a little bit professional, even though towards the end of the election, to doing collation, they began to act in a partisan manner, giving cover to various infractions that you would expect that they would have arrested those individuals. And then with regards to the performance of the electoral management body, I would say that, we were satisfied with the fast upload of results from the polling units. And I think by 11 p.m. of that night, the IRF had turned out about like 6% of the results. However, looking at the results being uploaded, and you had concerns when the number of accredited voters and the number of eventual voters, when there are serious discrepancies there, then that tells you, in fact, this election is soft on really of the newspaper. One of the newspaper front page said there, former President Obasa just saying that politics itself is not dirty, but what is actually dirty is politicians. The politicians came up to play, and they somehow found a way to make a mess of the process, where you see the discrepancies in the statistics that you have on IRF. You would also have expected that with regards to the issues of early deployment, there was an issue of INEC officials complaining about no security cover for them. When the NURTW people eventually arrived, there was no security to convey the EMB officials to the various polling units. And so this accounted for some of the delays. But overall, I think we can do better. I think every stakeholder in the process need to sit down and ask themselves serious questions. If we were going to spend all this kind of money, and then at the end of the day, the process is compromised this way.
Well, I was going to ask you if you would give a score to the overall process. What would you give? Over 100.
Well, in terms of process, elections, on the day of elections is the culmination of a process that started over a year ago. And so even with the hiccups you had with the flooding and all that, and the fire incident, that the fact that elections was not postponed, and the fact that all the benchmarks that were set for the commission were met, and then on the election day performance, that's where the IRF, worked to perfection. In fact, some people were saying it was even working too fast. I would give the processes leading up to this an A in my book. However, I would also have serious concerns about but then that also brings you to conflict with judicial pronouncements with regards to what determines overvoting. Is it what the BVAS accreditation system has provided for, or is it the election register as the Supreme Court has said? There were collusions here in some places with some of the ad hoc staff. I expect the commission to come hard on some of these people that colluded. However, given what we experienced in the general elections with the failure of technology, I will give the performance of technology in this instance, I will give it a solid A in my rating. However, like I said, some of the numbers we are seeing, and then the transparency of IRF in exposing these discrepancies, showing us how accredited voters is different from the number of people voting, a far cry, tells you that perhaps the system worked, but perhaps the system has been compromised. So you expect the systems by the commission to step up and then find a solution to this particular menace of overvoting.
And as a result of that, what will you give?
Mark, where is that to me?
Well, then
not yet. Dr. Chima, yes.
I will give for the politicians, I will give them a solid F. They needed to perform better. I will give them a solid F because what you saw, and like my colleague here said, was an abuse of process, whether it is the buying and selling of votes. I will give a solid F for the voters that allow themselves, to sow their votes. I also give a solid F for the security that comported themselves to an extent, and but then dropped the ball when it was time for collation. I will give them a C. For the commission themselves that allowed these processes to come to the play, but then somehow it's ad hoc staff. Some ad hoc staff allowed for the overvoting, because you can't run away from it. The only reason why you saw the accreditation vote in numbers being different from the actual votes means that somebody somewhere, a staff somewhere, actually uploaded and colluded there. And so the buck falls on the commission. And I would say that the commission will take responsibility for that. And in this particular case, I will give them a B in my analysis for wherever.
Overall, what would you give? Because I see 2 A's, 1 F, a C, and a B.
This is a far improvement from the general elections, the presidential elections. So I will give the performance of this election a B in terms of processes. Far improvement. Well, but because for me, I gave the process in the presidential election a D in terms of the failure of technology. And to move away from that to the performance, and that this B is a high B plus in my book. Save for the collusion, like I mentioned, of some ad hoc staff, that would have been an A plus in my book.
Dr. J. Epelle, you've seen him break it down. I mean, in terms of, because you also broke it down to process, provisions, and performance. I imagine that you would also want to give scores along that line, because for a number of people, especially observers like you, the process is more important than the results. So by all means, can you also give us your own rating of the election so far?
Exactly, Mogbe. Process is very important because process will lead you to a verifiable performance rating. I think Dr. Chima is very generous with his numbers and his assessment, and I tend to agree with him in many aspects. But I'd like to give overall performance rating in terms of percentage. I would say 46%. Generally. Yes, there are some element of this election that is a far a good improvement from 2023, but it's unfortunate that I will personally describe this election, off-cycle election, as one of the worst. Taking into cognizance the level of preparation and the assurance, I thought that INEC in general would take this election and perform creditably well so that they can begin to redeem the confidence and trust deficit that they have suffered in the previous election. You will notice that we released a joint statement by Yaga, by Women Trust Fund,
KDI.
Africa, yes, and that statement is explicit picture of what transpired and what is still playing out. I think we're beginning to see more a playbook, a future playbook of what to come. If we don't take time and correct some of these issues, you will see the same thing playing out in Ondo or even in 2027. I think this is something that is very worrisome, and taking into cognizance the amount of money and resources that we put into this election. It's unfortunate that the political class have decided to rubbish the democratic values and dividends that we are all working hard towards.
Let me quickly take you back, because before these elections in 2020, when Edo State went to the polls, there were fears were just coming out of COVID at that time, and Edo was going to be the first state to conduct elections post-COVID. There were also very strong tensions in the air, regarding the political arrangements. However, I think it was also the first time that INEC was also going to be testing the beavers ahead of the 2023 election. So Edo State was some test ground of sorts in many regards. And it does appear that that election was one of the things that made people have confidence that the beavers could, really be a game changer for the 2023 elections. If you were to analyze that election vis-a-vis the analysis of this one, how would you say that INEC has done in the conduct of elections, particularly in the areas that it has powers over? Because it can't argue that it doesn't have powers over whether there'll be violence or whether there'll be vote buying. Those are things certainly out of its control. It can only advocate. But in the areas where it does have control, would you say that it has improved from 2020, or did we retrogress?
I think maybe the COVID was a blessing in disguise, because somehow some of the processes and the provisions, in spite of the harsh realities of that time, were followed to a large extent. And we saw what looked impossible, the emergence of a political figure that was in hot contention with his political masters. However, I think some of the outcome was adjudged fair, in spite of the fact that, yes, there were irregularities, but I think the outcome was a bit fair compared to what we have today. Not because the incumbent didn't win. I'm strictly apolitical. I don't care who wins. And in this context, both APC and PDP somehow violated the rules, and including every other person, So, yes, in direct answer to your question, I think we had a fair election then compared to what we have today. Give it to INEC that in some quarters, they tried to do the needful, the introduction of the IREP, like my colleague said. Their effort in trying to mobilize to start the election on time were disappointed by the transporters and in some cases by the security operatives. It's unfortunate that these things keep reoccurring, despite the fact that we have informed the political umpire, including the political class, of these things and the adverse effect of them, because it affects the trust in and confidence in democracy. It affects everything. But I must also say, more that one of the best takeaway for me in this whole process was the media coverage led by your station. I was very, very, very pleased the level of coverage and on-the-spot assessment that most of your reporters, the risks they took, some of them were under the rain. I think we had the best of media reporting in this election, which to me is one of the best things that I would score 98%. And the coverage was very inclusive. So it's a heartwarming outcome of this election, and how people can put their lives at risk just to make sure that people will have information right in their living room. That's a good thing. But I think we need to sit down and interrogate the entire electoral process. If there's any time to call for reform, Mr. President, this is now the time to call for reform. We need total electoral overhaul and a reform that will produce what truly the people that are struggling every day, making effort to make sure that we have a true democracy and not a reflection of democracy. You know, every one of us has a part to play. And let me also use this opportunity more to say to Edo people, you don't take the law. Don't take anything, don't do anything that is completely against the law. Sit calm, sit well, be at peace, and let things play out. Those who are aggrieved will go to court. Unfortunately, the court is trying to replace the place of the ballot, and that's unfortunate for everybody. We're a situation where we will do the wrong thing and boldly come on a national television to tell our opponent, go to court. That had become the mantra for this kind of dirty democracy, and it must stop if we must chart a course for children born and unborn.
At the end of the day, Mr. Epelle, you know, it's all about the electorate, the people who vote, the people who, well, while the media risks their own lives to go out to do their job, there is also those people who risk their lives, so to speak, to come out to vote. But let me take that question to Mr. Amadi. You know, one of the most important things for me during the elections is the voter turnout. And it would seem like, particularly during governorship elections, the number of people that come out to vote reduces compared to the number of people who come out to vote during national elections. And it's even lower for local government elections. I'm looking at the figures. It's less than 600,000 votes that were ascribed to the top three of the governorship candidates during this election. Less than 600,000. More than 2.2 million voters had already collected their PVCs. The election expected so many people to come out, but less than 600,000 were accounted for the top three. How significant is that for you?
Low voter turnout is not a new phenomenon. It's globally there's an apathy to elections. In fact, it's been stated that democracy is in remission. So it's not a new phenomenon. However, for the case of Nigeria, you could explain. There's so many explanations. When you militarize a normally civil process, the kind of rhetoric that we heard to the build up to the elections, you know, we had things of a do or die affair, you know, win at all costs. People have blood flowing through their veins. It's capable of scaring or putting people away from coming near the polling booths. So this is the reason why we always advocate for people to tone down their rhetoric. And when also before the elections, you have the security agencies put up a show, what they call show of force. You have security agencies, drive around town in all their paraphernalia, exhibiting various assault weapons. You also put fear in the voters. And then with the other variables, non-state actors that make various threats. These are the kinds of things that will scare voters. Another reason will be that voters have always worried that their votes may not count eventually. And then, like Mr. Epelle was saying, the problem of our electoral process, some you can pinpoint on actors on election day. But what you're seeing today, it's a reflection of what happened outside what happens on election day. The political actors have simply found a loophole on the various pronouncements of the courts. So the ballot no longer determines, or vote no longer determines what happens. When the innovation of the IREF and the BVAS, which was first tested in Edo and worked to near perfection. In fact, the IREF saved the day when it was first introduced 4 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, in Edo State, and we embraced it. However, there was a loophole. There was a pronouncement that talked about the determinant of overvoting. And that accreditation by BVAS does not determine whether there's overvoting. And what determines overvoting is the voter register. And so it was tested by political actors such that the BVAS gives a different reading. People write down all kinds of numbers they want.
Mr. Amadi, while all of that is part of the process that you and Mr. Epelle had spoken about, I'm just talking about the voter apathy thing, whether or not we actually, just 1 second, whether we actually did enough as a people, as government, as political parties, as the election umpire, to convince people that it is safe for them to come out to vote. That really is the question. As you said, the phenomenon may not be a new thing, but the decisions that will be taken by the political leaders will affect everyone, whether you voted or not, whether you registered to vote or not. But then you also spoke about the anticlimactic nature of the elections in terms of security. Now, on the one hand, you said, police came out to show, and security agencies came out with show of force and everything. And then on the election day, everything just kind of tapered down. It's a little difficult to really put into perspective exactly how to situate everything. You're saying that on the one hand, it may have discouraged people from coming out. On the other hand, it also ensured that there was no breakdown of law and order. So where can we find a balance here?
The question is, why are people not coming out to vote? And I'm explaining to you that, one, the build-up to the elections, you had violent rhetoric. You had people refusing to sign the peace accords, you had all that. And then you had security agencies, more or less militarizing the civil process. And then also, I gave you another variable, which is that if people feel that no matter what they do, even if they come out to their numbers, that the result has already been predetermined, that their votes will not count. It's enough to keep people away from vote, which is why I was explaining the reasons why people feel that their results will not count because of what has happened outside the day of elections. And then you also have, the other factors, for example, that put to the question our electoral register. You could have 2.2 million, registered voters. But the question is, the 2.2 million registered voters, are they really 2.2 million persons with live persons and not, the numbers that were inflated? Remember, this voter register comes from, I think, 2011 and has been built over time. And if you recall, if you have been following the process, this was a period when political actors were just pumping in numbers and registering people no matter what. And all that. So
you're thinking maybe the numbers have reduced over time, but there was no
what I'm saying is that the initial, before the BVAS process, which now started, sifting out real voters, because the BVAS improved the process of accreditation, because it now takes in, and that's why it's bimodal. It takes not just the fingerprints, it also takes the face. So for you now to accredit, you must be a real individual. And now the database, which is a register, was instituted when this technology was not at play. So I make bold to say that the 2.2 million voters are not real people if you break it down to the nitty-gritty of numbers. So if the people that collected, or the process of collecting a voter's card is such that you cannot even use it because BVAS will find out, or BVAS will not accredit you, most people will stay behind. So these are some of the factors. Like I said, securitization of elections. 2, feeling that your votes will not count. 3, is our voter register, is the number of registered voters, are they really real live people that you can feel, or is it overinflated? So when you put this into context...
What's interesting in that, Mr. Chima, is that the 2.2 is the number of people, 2.249 actually, is the number of people that have collected their PVCs according to INEC. But then there is also another question that Chamberlain had raised here, and let me take that to you, Mr. Epelle, is the cost of the election. More than 300 billion naira was voted for the 2023 election. I don't know how much was voted this time around. And if the economic realities are to be considered, there's a likelihood of that being doubled for the next general election. And I'm not even sure, how much we have spent for the Edo election, how much we will spend for the Ondo election and all of that. So in terms of the cost of the elections vis-a-vis the results that we get based on the permutations that you and Mr. Amadi have spoken about, what's your take? Should we continue in this path of spending so much money for this kind of result? Or do you think there's another way that we can begin to consider?
Ayo, thank you very much. I think my simple answer to that question is Nigerian election is one of the most expensive in the world. Taking into consideration our numbers, taking into consideration the over-preparation and very, very minimal performance. But I think I'd like to weigh in on what is responsible for somewhat voter apathy that we kept experiencing. And I agree with Dr. Chima, most of the postulations that he presented. However, I think I tend to agree with you more on the issue of voter education, which places the responsibility on all of us, first, as civil society, and of course, two, the electoral umpire. We need to do more as civil society in terms of voter education. The electoral umpires, the EMB, Electoral Management Body, needs to do much more in terms of voter education. We don't tell the people about these elections. We don't prepare them well enough. We don't sensitize them around the provision that makes election very, very interesting. We scare them with all kinds of security issues. We cry foul, and I think the security operatives, they do this intentionally to get more money from government. And that's what makes this election over-bloated. And I think also the trend will continue unless we come back sometimes to launch an investigation into who spent what and for what and why. And at the end of the day, are there proofs that the resources are mismanaged? Are there proof that people pocketed the money and didn't do what they expected to do? Because nobody is held accountable, because everybody feels that it's free lunch in Lagos or Abuja, and they spend the money recklessly, do whatever they like. At the end of the day, they keep asking for more. Election in this country is too expensive, considering the suffering of the masses, how people are struggling to eat when billions are given to individuals that will never account how they spent it. It is unnecessary. It is shameful. It is shameful that in a country where people can't even eat 3 times, that we are spending billions and billions of naira in electoral process.
All right, gentlemen, pardon me, we need to begin to wind down now. Pardon me to jump in. Let me ask you, Dr. Amadi. I mean, you did say that at the moment you thought it was about 20,000 naira that they were using to buy votes. And so one wonders, going by what Mr. Epelle was talking about, that look, people are struggling to eat. So, for instance, the votes that went to Mr. Akwata, even though he said, yes, even if the road is tough, he doesn't mind, but the people told him he was their guy, but apparently maybe he didn't spend as much money. So the thing is, no matter how much voter education goes out there, if you offer electorates money, how easy or difficult is it going to be for them to reject it? If they're buying vote for 20,000 naira now, who knows, tomorrow it might be 30. Dr. Amadi, that's for you.
For me, Mr. Akpata is the winner of the election, a moral winner of the election, because he stuck to his principles in terms of refusing to buy votes. And for me, again, I said, it's if people have made up their mind that they want to cash out on election day, there's absolutely nothing the INEC or civil society or whatever messaging you want to drive can do about it. And the reason is simple again, because poverty has been weaponized here in where people are so impoverished, and then the governance does not really get to them, and they feel the only day they can make a cash out, even if it's to have a pot of soup on that day, is on election day. It's pathetic, really. It's a very bad, because elections have consequences. But I make bold to say that it can only go higher. And with a quick one, if the new technology, I think it was one of your colleagues in the studio that said, why can't we even introduce electronic voting? If you introduce a new technology, you would get more money to be voted, because the reason why you had over 300 billion was because beavers machines and were hard to purchase. If you want to do electronic voting, be prepared for an election that will get up to 1 trillion, because you have to buy the equipment, you have to commission them, and once you buy the equipment, more money. So that explains the reason for the. And then again, you have the so-called deployment of 30,000 policemen that is unaudited. Who audits the number of policemen on that day? But to summarize, like you said, it can only get worse if the people are determined to sell their votes.
So, Mr. Epelle, what do we do about collation centers? How do we manage them? Do we eliminate them? What can the solutions be? That seems to be a major bone of contention.
Chamberlain, the issue of collation center is explicit. It's very well put together. The problem is the people that manages the collating and how and where they want it done. The problem is not the establishment. The problem is the operations of those collation centers, and the wickedness in the heart of some election management personnel, security operatives, and the politicians who think.
So how do we address that then?
Well, the point is to interrogate the possibility and the viability of those centers. Are they something we need to continue? It's not a question of coming on television and postulating and providing an answer. We need to do a critical stakeholder analysis of the situation and make a determination whether we should go on with it or not. But I agree with you. It plays out in this election. It contributed to some of the problems that we have. When INEC changes the goalpost at every moment, that is a problem. And that will be one of the bone of contention in this election. I think we need to stick to our guns when we make guidelines and when we make laws.
Okay, so tell us then, as you wind down, pardon me to jump in, what would you tell a voter who might be out there saying, look, I've been voting for a while, it's just always frustrating, my vote doesn't count, and I keep coming out. Why should I come out the next time?
Well, Chamberlain, thank you for the opportunity. Let me say generally to every Edo indigene, yes, one camp is feeling bad, the other camp is not. Please do not do anything that will violate the law and the peace of this wonderful state and the people. Let's stay calm. Let's do the needful. Let's wait and pursue our grievances in the most legal and legit way. It will not pay anybody to shed anybody's blood. It will not pay anybody to create chaos and mayhem. It doesn't take us anywhere. Finally, the election is something that we must not take for granted or play with. If we don't follow this process, we will produce charlatans.
All right.
We will produce those that we don't ever dream
let's
of beating us.
Let's hear Dr. Amadi as we just wrap up.
Stay the course.
All right, pardon me. But Dr. Amadi, what would you tell such voters?
I would simply ask voters to continue to stay the course and hope that someday a Daniel will come to judgment.
Hope? But they always say hope is on a strategy. How do we just hope? Because it's going to be tough and challenging to give hope.
Because the truth of the matter, Chamberlain, you talked about collation centers.
Yeah.
The intendment of IREV was to bypass collation centers so that by the end of any voting, every Nigerian has seen it. You don't even need collation centers, has seen the results. But we have seen what politicians have done to that. When you have a situation where you pump results on freely from the polling unit and upload, the whole system of trying to bypass collation has been defeated because now the rigging has now been taken to the micro units of polling units at that place. So I think we need to have a conversation, and because to inspire confidence into Nigerians to continue to vote and to believe in democracy, the simple thing of voting, the electoral process must be cleaned up.
All right, so I have to thank you because, I mean, actually, if people don't come out to vote, if you're already coming out to vote and you have these kind of things playing out, so imagine what happens if you leave it all out for them to do whatever they want. So I guess that answers, well, maybe to a large extent. So, gentlemen, thank you both for talking to us this morning, Dr. Chima Amadi and Mr. Jake Epelle.
Thank you, Chamberlain, and keep doing the good work. Channel, you're one of the best. Keep doing what you do.
Thank you. Well, Business Morning comes up on the hour.